think that's very Nolan in a way, to take a film set in the 40s and 50s and making it relevant to today. And I think the ability to weave present issues in the real world into his films without shoving it down your throat is really where Nolan's talent lies. Hello everyone, welcome back to Hey It's Jay. I've just come back from watching Oppenheimer and I want to share my thoughts with you. First and foremost, this is a spoiler warning. If you haven't seen the film, I strongly suggest you go watch it first before watching this video. I won't be going into an extreme detail of spoilers. It might just be general things where I might accidentally say a little bit too much. It wouldn't ruin your experience, but if you're looking for that truly unknown going into the film, unknown experience, then maybe this video isn't right for you right now, but do come back after you've seen the film. Now, this is going to be a very free-flowing conversation, not too much structure. I've just come back from the film now. My feelings are raw and honest, and I think this is the best time to share them with you. Perhaps later on I might post a more cohesive, structured review, so you can consider this my first reaction after watching the film. Now, I didn't get to watch this film on IMAX, unfortunately. Located in Sydney, Australia, we currently don't have an IMAX. It should be opening very soon. I watched it on a Onyx screen, which is essentially the closest to an OLED quality, TV picture quality that you can achieve in the cinema. I had a great sound experience in terms of the surround sound and the rumble. I did have some issues with the audio dialogue. Now, I'm not sure if that's specific to the film. Christopher Nolan films in the past have had this issue, such as Tenet. I did struggle to hear the audio, as did other people I went with. I hope this isn't consistent for all viewers. I hope that is just for my particular cinema, but it's worth raising nonetheless. Now, speaking briefly on Nolan before we get into this film, I have loved Nolan's filmography. I haven't seen every film of his. When I say that, I'm referencing more the older films, but every film of recent times, I'd say perhaps the last decade, maybe even 15 years I've seen. Some of my personal favorites being The Prestige, Interstellar, and then of course I've really enjoyed films like Inception and even some of his weaker ones like Tenet. Now, this film, Oppenheimer, sits, I would say, quite differently to where his other films fall. My first raw feeling coming out of this film, I would describe the film as very, very solid. Ahead of this film, I hadn't seen any trailers. I had watched a few clips of the cast discussing the film and their acting techniques. I wanted to limit myself from seeing any of the content. I did see some reviews on the day. I probably should not have, to avoid preconceived notions, but it was hard to avoid. So I did see some really strong positive reviews. It probably influenced my perceptions and expectations ever so slightly, so I will admit that. But I would walk away from this film saying it was extremely solid. Has it found its way to the top of my Nolan filmography? I wouldn't say so. Has it made it into my top 5 films of all time? I wouldn't say so. Do I have a really strong urge to go rewatch this tomorrow? I wouldn't say so. But just because it doesn't meet those 3 kind of questions, does that make it a bad film? No, not at all. It's a fantastic film. All the signature Nolan trademarks are there. You can tell it's a Nolan film. The music, the cinematography, and again, music whilst I'm here. Ludwig Göransson, if that's how you pronounce his name, has done it again. Fantastic composer, fantastic artist. I was first exposed to him in the work he did on Black Panther, which I thought was a fantastic album, and he's also done The Mandalorian, a show that I've really enjoyed. He worked on Tenet as well, and now on this film. In fact, the soundtrack in this film is very reminiscent of Hans Zimmer. So if you're a Hans Zimmer fan, and especially a fan of Nolan's past films' soundtracks, this won't let you down. I think it's an ode to traditional film. I think the cinematography, I think the acting, and we'll get into more on that later, soundtrack, which I already mentioned, every technical component of this film is perfect. I don't think Nolan's been too indulgent in any particular setting. I don't think he has tried to glorify any characters. I don't feel like he's tried to villainify, if that's a word, any characters either. I think he's remained relatively unbiased and historically accurate, perhaps historically accurate almost to a flaw. At some points, you feel with a 3-hour runtime that the film is dragging slightly in some scenes. And, going into spoiler territory a little bit, obviously the film is about Oppenheimer and a big focus of his life is obviously the atomic bomb. So if you're going in thinking this movie is just about the atomic bomb, you're going to be somewhat satisfied. It is obviously largely to do with that. That is the largest milestone of Oppenheimer's life, but it is very much to do with Oppenheimer. Quite a lot of politics involved as well, something that I knew would be prevalent, but probably not to the extent that it was in this film. One of the things that I just felt that I was yearning for more in this film was actually the science, something that Christopher Nolan usually indulges his audience in, with the kind of whimsy, the interesting conversations, the back and forth, the calculations to get to that answer. We didn't really do much of that here. Like the development of the bomb, they show us them making it, physically making it, and there's very little science actually discussed. There are a few conversations here and there, but don't expect a scene of scientists sitting in the room or Oppenheimer committing some sort of miracle out of thin air. It's just not there. And I spoke with a few people after the film, and we all felt that it was maybe missing that 5-10 minutes of science behind how they actually made the bomb, which would have made it a little bit more compelling. But then I guess it goes back to, again, is the story about the creation of the bomb, or is the story about Oppenheimer, who happened to create a bomb? That being said, Cillian Murphy has done a phenomenal job as Oppenheimer. I think it's one of his best performances. Do I think it's a performance that defines the generation? I wouldn't say so. I would say it's very strong, no two ways of doubt. I think he will get an Oscar nomination. Will he win the Oscar? I'm not sure. Robert Downey Jr., on the other hand, I can definitely see him getting nominated for Best Supporting Male. I can even see him winning it. He's just done a phenomenal job. And I guess the issue with Robert is we've seen him as Iron Man for over 20 years. And Tony Stark, Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr., they're all kind of blended together because he is playing almost a version of himself when he's played Tony Stark. And sometimes you see little flares of that pop up here. Now, that's not because he's playing it in a Tony Stark way. That's because Robert Downey Jr. is like Tony Stark, and Robert Downey Jr. is playing this character. Can I fully remove him? It's difficult, but I can. And he's done a really good job. And that's not a fault of his own. If you do the same character for 20 years, of course, people are going to personify that character onto you as a person also. A lot of what the film focuses on, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but it's also a given, is Oppenheimer grappling with his decision to make the bomb and then the subsequent repercussions. And one of the people he's kind of conflicting with, and I won't go into detail with who that is, their argument is, how can you be so conflicted when you worked on this project for years and years and years? And that's a big point of the film. And I feel like Christopher Nolan doesn't hold your hand in helping you decide who you agree with. In fact, I've come out thinking no one's particularly right, no one's particularly wrong. Maybe that was the intention, and I really think that reflects well that Nolan didn't come into this film with a bias. Speaking of hand-holding, this film definitely doesn't hold your hand in terms of timeline, locations. Do not expect any year timestamps that we've grown accustomed to. Do not expect some exposition explaining what's going on or who a certain character is. There are several blink and you miss it moments. Famous physicist Niels Bohr is introduced at one point. If you didn't know who that was, then that scene won't mean much for you. I luckily do, thanks to high school physics. But there are small things like that where it won't be putting a label of their name or the location. So he definitely doesn't hold your hand. And the timeline obviously moves a lot as well. In fact, the color in which they shoot this film changes a lot. I don't want to go too much into that again due to that spoiler territory, but it really comes down to a perspective, one being in color, the other being black and white. And what the black and white is really representative of is the narrator of that part of the story is actually unsure or not 100% telling the story correctly, is what my opinion, and which is why I think it's in black and white. One scene I do want to discuss, which is a true story of Oppenheimer, which he did try to poison his professor at one point using an apple. And of course they've shown that scene in the film, but I think what Nolan's done, I'm assuming it's intentional, or perhaps I'm getting a little bit too intellectual, but he basically is a little bit annoyed at his professor, and so he sees an apple on his desk and decides to put cyanide in the apple. And quite obviously, the professor, if they were to eat this apple, would die. And so he poisons that apple. Following putting the cyanide in the apple, he then goes home and tries to sleep. He struggles to sleep, and then he wakes up in the morning and he's like, what have I done? And he runs to the room and stops the professor from eating that apple. And I personally think that apple is actually a metaphor for the bomb that he creates and then the moral dilemma that he faces later. As I said, a big talking point of the film is A, him making the bomb, but then B, the moral conundrum, whether he feels he did the right thing or not. And Oppenheimer has the opinion that he should not have done that, and he gets questioned a lot about that, which is, how can you have that opinion now, having spent several years making it? And I think that apple is a perfect metaphor. He created the apple, the bomb, with the intention of killing his professor, or in this instance, stopping the war or killing the Nazis. However, upon completion of the bomb, he has a moral conundrum, a doubt about whether this is the thing he should be doing, and then he rushes back to the professor's room to stop him from eating the apple. Similarly, once the bomb is created, the next day, the bomb's taken away from him. He doesn't actually have control on when they're going to drop it, where they're going to drop it. And so I think it actually answered the question, did the moral conundrum start once he finished the bomb, or once it killed the people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? That's a big element of what the film is discussing, and I think the apple was actually a metaphor that he did indeed feel guilt immediately after the completion of the bomb, not just after it killed people. And one thing I want to discuss, and this is really for those of you who've seen the film, Oppenheimer often said, and this is something I knew before I watched the movie as well, but obviously the movie discusses it a lot as well, the risk of creating this atomic bomb and setting it off, and the chain reaction never being able to stop, and then it reaching the upper atmosphere and then obviously causing, well, the world to blow up. And that's a big kind of talking point. It's almost a joke in the film because the chances of it happening are near zero, and they say that in the film also. However, as we saw in the end scene, we see Oppenheimer talking to Einstein saying, remember when I showed you that calculation where there was a risk of the chain reaction blowing up Earth? Well, I think it happened anyway. And that messaging and showing the final shot of the Earth basically blowing up is a very real possibility in our short to mid to long-term future, as there is obviously a lot of political instability in the world right now, and a lot of major countries have nuclear weapons at the moment. And I think that's very Nolan in a way, to take a film set in the 40s and 50s and making it relevant to today. And I think the ability to weave present issues in the real world into his films without shoving it down your throat is really where Nolan's talent lies. Now, I appreciate this hasn't been the most formulated discussion. I've been a little bit all over the place, and I think a Nolan movie will often do that to you, or leave you with a lot of emotions. And I'm interested to see if my perception changes. I'm keen to jump on the forums and see what other people have said about the movie. I'm keen to discuss with some of my friends what their thoughts, and most importantly, I'm keen to hear what you, my audience, thinks of the film. So be sure to share that in the comments below. I'm weighing up whether I go see it again. If you, my audience, suggest I go see it again, if there's something I missed, do let me know. I'd love to be proven wrong or shown a different perspective. I love that, and I think that's one of the great things about Nolan movies, is the differing opinions and the conversation afterwards and trying to figure it out. Films that tend to stay with you a little bit, which is really what that movie-going experience is all about. You know, inciting conversation, forcing you to think a little bit, and I think Nolan has done that again. But for now, let's leave the video there. As always, please like the video if you enjoyed it, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Thanks for watching, HJ, and I'll see you in the next one.